I am so grateful to BookNet Canada for asking me to talk about something that didn't involve XML. My epitaph will be, he talked about workflow. Today, or this afternoon, at this very moment, I'm not talking about workflow. I'm talking about a project that's very near and dear to my heart that, as Michael introduced, we've been working on for about a year. And that's the impact of free and piracy on book sales. And free is not new. It actually has a long and pretty successful history. Galleys, ARCs, advanced reading copies, BLAD, sample chapters, all of these things are free. And they're examples of giving away content to promote the sale of printed books. Digital sampling is also on the big component of a lot of publishers' marketing efforts. But there have been only a small set of experiments that use fully free content, taking an unprotected file, releasing it into the wild, seeing what happens. Why did we decide to look at this topic in the last year? Well, the first is there is a lot more digital content in the world. People like me have been reasonably successful at convincing people like you to have more digital content. Thank you. There are better ebook readers, which is going to draw more of that content into the universe. There's a perception of a piracy threat. And there's also this ongoing free debate. Is it good? Is it bad? Will it kill us? Is it like the music industry? Is it not like the music industry? So about a little bit less than a year ago, Andrew Savickas approached Mike Shatzkin, with whom I share an office, and said, is there any way for us to get out from this less filling, tastes great debate about piracy and free content and start talking about the impact on. So we conceived a methodology that I'm about to describe that we tested using a set of titles from both O'Reilly in the piracy mode and Random House. The research approach is fairly standard. I'm not going to go through the steps. These presentations, as is the case with all of them, are going to be available on the BNC website if you want to pick them up. But fundamentally, we're at the fourth stage, which is assessing implications. We've developed a preliminary test sample. We want more. In a sense, I'm here to recruit you. I'd love to have more samples in the data set. But for the moment, we're going to report on what we know. But the research really is data-driven. It's open to the extent that we share the results of the data. We protect publishers' data where they want us to. And we're trying to share knowledge, not limit it. We approached it in a very structured way. I realize this is small, but at the top we have things like the type of book, the timing, the market served, segmented in a much finer way. So if you had a market for the book, it might be adult, young adult, children's. We also tried to capture the content characteristics for like books. Over time, as we grow the sample set, this is going to allow us to take different types of books from different tests and different publishers and combine them, and then start to run comparisons to say, all right, well, maybe in education this is a truly bad idea, but for children it's not such a bad idea, and it can help in these instances. So we can compare and contrast. The primary research findings at this point, the first is that the value of free is really not binary. There's this notion that it's either good or bad, and what we're finding is that it's neither, or it's both. And specifically by that we mean that there's a white market. In effect, you give out content, print sales would be an example, or DRM protected digital sales, where you feel like you have a pretty good hold on, I gave the file, I got paid for it. And there's a back channel. We didn't want to call it black market. It sounded a little bit untoward. But there's a back channel where, in effect, there's unauthorized duplication, there's pirated content. But there's a really robust middle that includes things like unprotected digital sales, galleys and ARCs, free promotions, that has an impact on sales. And we're trying to figure out what that impact is. Now, over lunch I was talking to a couple of folks, and piracy does exist. There's no question that piracy exists. We're not here to tell you it doesn't. We're here to try and figure out what impact does piracy and free distribution have on sales. Right? We're agnostic on the other fronts. So what did we test? The first, for the free component, which is the Random House titles, we looked at several different varieties of PDF downloads. We looked at a free ebook download, and generally the tests were a day to a week. In a couple of cases, they were a little bit longer. For the monitoring peer-to-peer, we looked at the entire O'Reilly front list for 2008. It was, I think, about 60 titles. And we track anytime one of those titles appeared on one or more peer-to-peer sites, we would track the activity around it. So we're looking at 3 different BitTorrent sites. Only one had more than one, Pirate Bay was the only one that had more than one title on it. A total of 8 titles actually appeared, and we'll show some of that data in a minute. And then once a title did appear, we tracked the activity of both seeds, which are, this is not quite the way to think about it, but they're not truly uploads or downloads, but they're effectively a measure of the activity on torrent sites. Here's what we found. On the Random House side, which is 8 titles and 12 different, across a total of 12 formats, sales were up 19% during the promotional period, meaning that during the period of time that whether it's a week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, that they were promoting print or paid content with that, sales increased 19%. We looked at it relative to the 4 weeks prior, and then the total promotional period, which is the 1 to 3 weeks that they were actually promoting it using free, and then the 4 weeks following that test when it ended, were up an average of 6.5%, or a total of 6.5%. But there's a big range. I mean, the up was as high as 155% for one of the books, to a low of 74% down. The 155%, really well-known book, promoted on a variety of platforms with a free download, and it did have an Oprah effect. The 74% down, first-time novelist, and it was an effort to try and get greater recognition. On the O'Reilly side, 8 titles out of that front list from 2008 made it to a pirate site or torrent site sometime in 2008. The average post-seed sales, meaning that in the 4 weeks after a book was pirated, were up 6.5%. This ranged from 18% up to 33% down. It was a relatively low volume of seeds and leeches. We'll show you the specifics. And the average first seeds appeared 20 weeks after publication date. Now, this was kind of a surprise because O'Reilly and their senior staff editors, not Andrew, but other folks, said, we're getting pirated. Every one of our books is up on a torrent site the day it's published. As soon as we release it, it's up there. That wasn't the case. It's up on some sites, the more traditional file sharing sites, but torrent sites were not that, at least for this list. The second piece that we took out of this, and this is is that at least at this moment, the piracy threat may be overstated. The first is that there's a relatively low incidence of piracy, 8 books out of 60 on a very savvy, tech-savvy audience for O'Reilly's titles. This is not to say that Stephanie Meyer's but there are 2 million books in print, and AAP a year and a half ago found 1,100 had been pirated to some extent. This is the only study that had been done that started to look at the actual impact on sales. The second is that people aren't rushing out to pirate the books. There was a 20-week lag time on average between when a book was published and when it actually was pirated. It's 5 months. And the technical skills that are required to make a torrent site work, they're not impossible to overcome, but they're not trivial either. Now, a couple of things that we wanted to just share with you very quickly. The number of seeds peaked really quickly. Now, this is normed. This is not in any one week, but from the week that a book was first seen on a torrent site to when it peaked in activity and then what happened in the weeks before, essentially it's a 6-week window. It looks a lot like sell-in. In week 3, the most seeds that we saw for any book, I believe, was the iPhone Missing Manual, very popular. You should all buy it. Total of 40 seeds. The interesting thing is that the number of leeches, which are the effectively people obtaining, peaked a week earlier. It was never more than 13, and it essentially flatlined to something in the range of 2 to 4 leeches at any given time in the weeks following. So it's not a high volume of activity. These are books that were selling typically several hundred to about 1,000 titles in a week, and you're seeing leech activity that's in the range of 2 to 10. The other thing that is that lag time before seeding really did vary. Here it's an average of 20 weeks in this sample set. It was as few as 4. That's the iPhone Missing Manual. That immediately got picked up. But that was still a month after the fact. That was freely available, and so it took a month for somebody to put it up on a site. So some of the surprises were that the number and the range of under-the-radar free experiments, like house sample, were actually much more extensive than we expected. There was also very strong interest. In addition to Random House, we have two other publishers that are currently considering joining our sample set. The low volume of P2P incidents of the torrent sites was kind of a surprise. We thought we'd have trouble tracking it because there'd be so many titles up there. And the lag time, again, because we thought that it would be occurring at or just very shortly after publication. 3 useful cautions. The first, we're showing correlation here, the percentage increase and the shift increase or decreasing in the sample set. That's not causality, and we're not claiming it as such. And if you have larger data sets, which is our goal, you may see a sample skew. I mean, this may send us off in a different direction. The other thing is that what works today may not work as well in some future date. If there's a lot of free content in the universe that starts to crowd out paid content, well, it could change the equation. But right now, we're trying to figure out what the impact is, paid or unpaid and pirated content on paid book sales. Things that we're doing right now, we're continuing to test it and monitor P2P activity. We're looking for more publishers to help us fill in the matrix, gathering feedback and refining the analysis. And there's a rough cut research paper that's coming soon. Only Andrew can tell me when the paper will be available. But there's a link up here, and as I said, you can get it from the website as well. If you want to be alerted when that paper is available, you can register. You give an email. It's not an obligation. It's just a commitment to make me feel better. And then I go back, and O'Reilly says, "Wow, that speech went really well." So that's it. Any questions? You have a question?
I was just, can you explain the difference between seeds and leeches?
Morgan's question is, can I explain the difference between seeds and leeches, and in less than 10 seconds, right? Yeah. All right. The way torrent sites work is essentially they hold a file that tells you where the file is. So a seed is in effect the instructions for where the file is. The torrent sites themselves don't hold the file. It's one of the things that makes them difficult to pursue because they don't have content. They have metadata about content. So a seed is effectively uploading the metadata about the content. A leech is pulling that content. And because you typically will get the content from more than one source, the leeching process goes on from multiple sources simultaneously. Books are kind of funny because it's set up to do things like movies, large files. And so you'd want to have multiple streams coming from multiple places. Book files aren't that big. So they go on and off relatively quickly, and that may explain that may be one of the reasons why the activity or the interest goes up really quickly and drops really quickly. Does that help? Okay. Other questions? Go ahead.
Were the O'Reilly books still up for free, presumably on the O'Reilly site, while you were watching this happen on the torrent site?
O'Reilly doesn't publish that many books for free, including my research paper, which is good because then eventually I get paid.
But you said you put some up.
We didn't put them up. The books we debated deliberately seeding, and it's one of the things we may consider in the future, not necessarily with O'Reilly specifically, but it's something we could try. But you have to work that out with the author. And so it's really, these were books that were pirated in one way or another. It was this notion that it was occurring all the time. O'Reilly takes action on when it feels that its interests are compromised. But in this instance, this is fairly common for them, and they view it. I'm not speaking for O'Reilly, but they seem to view it as essentially progressive taxation. Question back here. Go ahead.
What would you say to a CEO, knowing that his sample set is small and needs to grow, who says that if you make everything free, the incentive to buy is removed?
So the question is, what would I say to a CEO who would say to me, if I make everything free? I would agree with that. Free is a really tough competitor. But the thing here is that our purpose, our goal, is to figure out instances in which free works or doesn't. And I think that, for example, one of the tests is releasing the first book in a fiction series that has been in print for a while to coincide with the release of the nth book in this series. Very effective in the tests that we looked at, a really effective way to grow the audience because who hadn't bought the first book, kind of left out of the series, brings them back in, other folks who otherwise might not have sampled it. And it actually grew both the print sales of the first book and it seemed to grow the sales of the nth book. There were other instances. If you're an education publisher, I'd fight it every step of the way. It seems really self-evident that that kind of modular or chunkable content could cost you dearly if you put it out for free. And our goal is to figure out where those boundaries exist before they start changing again. I think I missed a question. Was there another one? All right, I'm going to get out of here before somebody asks me a question I don't have an answer to. Thank you.